afternoon, everybody. Nick, aka Miniman82, coming to you from Norfolk, Virginia. It's a beautiful afternoon on Sunday. It's about 2 o'clock. We're going to go over basically how to rebuild a Corvair turbocharger. And these were built by TRW and Rajay back in the heyday, early turbo cars. We're going to touch on some of the finer points of how to get into these things and make them run like they should, make them last like they should, and I'll show you all the finer points of that. We'll also touch on parts cleanliness and how to check certain tolerances inside the unit. So hope you have fun with this video. I had fun making it. Alright, straight out of the gate, first thing I need to touch on is parts cleanliness. And not just parts cleanliness, assembly area cleanliness. Now, generally when people tear these things apart, they're going to be doing it in a garage, as I am. And that's fine. You just got to make sure you vacuum up anything on your workbench. Make sure you're working with clean tools, lint-free rags, clean hands, clean parts. Alright? You can't expect this thing to last as long as it should if you put it together with a whole bunch of crap up in it. I will go ahead and put a plug in for having your parts cleaned by other people if you don't have the facilities to do it yourself. Generally means taking it to a machine shop or an auto shop that has the ability to do abrasive cleaning, like, you know, bead blasting or sand grit blasting, that type of thing. Some of these parts are very sensitive. This is a turbine wheel here. First thing you'll notice about this turbine wheel, you got a nice smooth shaft. You want to mask that off all the way up to about this area right here. This area right here is where the oil seal is going to sit. And you can go ahead and blast this whole surface right here and all of the fins, as long as you don't remove any material from it or damage it in any way. Alright? So make sure your parts are clean before you go ahead and reassemble. And make sure if you are going to do any bead blasting, get inside that housing with a can of carb cleaner, hose everything down, get all that old glass grit out of there. You don't want to throw that thing back together with a bunch of grit. It's just going to act like sandpaper, and it will eat into that hardened steel shaft. I promise you, I've seen it before. That type of damage can be fixed, but it's just more work for you. So cleanliness, assembly area cleanliness, wash your hands before you get started so don't leave oil residue from your fingers on your parts, and make sure, like I said, to use a lint-free rag. Okay, once you're done cleaning your parts, you want to go ahead and do a thorough inspection. That means checking all the critical areas of your housings and your turbine and compressor wheels, going through your carbon seal, making sure all your circlips are not gouged, damaged, or bent or anything like that. One thing I like to pay special attention to is this area right in here. There's a little land where the turbine seal ring goes. A lot of times you'll find these housings with nicked or gouged areas in there. People tried to slam that turbine shaft in there without compressing that seal, and they've dinged this thing all up, and all it's going to do is leak on you. So make sure you're inspecting that groove right there. This right here is what area where that seal is going to sit, right here on this inside edge. So make sure it's perfectly clean, no nicks, no gouges. That way you assure yourself an oil leak free operation. And we'll go ahead and get into getting one put together right about now. Alrighty, so assuming you've got all of your parts nice and shiny and clean and got all the old burnt up oil and all the carbon deposits and all the crap out of it, the first thing you're going to want to do with all your nice clean parts, you're going to want to install this heat shield with its spring in the back here into the housing. Now notice that there's locating tangs here on this plate, 3 of them. Those line up with tangs in the spring. So go ahead and line your plate up. There we go. Now they make a special tool if you want to buy it. It costs about $75. I think Larry has a few LS Corvair parts on eBay. A few other people might have them. And the Rajay manual itself, if you can find it for download out there on the web, will actually have dimensions for you to build a special compressor to put on this thing while you're assembling it. I don't have that, so we're just going to do it the shade tree style and use a good old-fashioned C-clamp. This is how I've been doing it for years. What you want to do is get this clamp started compressing that spring against the housing. Get it to where it's just a little bit snug there so it don't pop off. Put the bottom one on. You want these to be about 180 apart. And you want to stay outside of this groove right here. This groove on this metal plate, this heat shield right here, is where the turbine fins are going to go, and you can't foul those. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and flip this around. There we go. You also want to stay away from the carbon steel area on the reverse side so that you can install that carbon steel once you're done. Alright. Make sure we're nice and tight here. Alright. And there you have it. You've compressed your heat shield against its spring up into the housing. And that's step number 1. Okay, so next step, you got your heat shield installed into the housing. Next thing you want to do is take your turbine wheel and your seal, your little metal turbine ring seal here. Slide that onto your shaft. Just kind of coax it over the groove there. Go ahead and get it installed. Now there's another part here I'd like to point out. Dig through my parts stash here. There's a little plastic suppressor ring, and this is intended to compress this turbine seal around the shaft and just sort of keep it in place so you ain't got to worry about it popping out on you. And that'll keep that seal compressed on that turbine shaft when you slide it into the housing. Make sure you don't gouge it up. I'll give you a close-up what that looks like here. There's your little suppressor ring right around the shaft. Alright, so with your turbine shaft prepared, now you're ready to go ahead and install this bearing here. Rajay's use a one-piece journal style bearing. It's not like the Garrett's that have one on the turbine and one on the compressor side. It's just one unit. These bearings have shims behind them. Let me take one out for you. Here's one here. Now this shim goes between the bearing and the housing. It's meant to take up end play between the two. So just go ahead and install that. And the bearing right behind it. Make sure you get your locating dowel through the hole there. And then what you want to do is find your snap ring wherever I put it here. My parts organization is not what it should be. I apologize. Here we go. And your snap ring is what's going to go next. That's going to hold that bearing in there. Now in order to install this, you've got to have a snap ring pliers with some fairly small jaws. Just find it here. Ah, found them. There they are. And you want to set these up so that they're going to squeeze that snap ring tight while you go ahead and put it in the housing. Notice I haven't put any oil on anything yet. Now make sure you get that snap ring all the way seated into that housing. You can install this with just a flat bladed screwdriver, just kind of pry it into the groove in there. That also works, but I like to use the right tool for the job. That means snap ring pliers. Okay, after you get the bearing installed, next you're going to want to put that turbine shaft in and slide it home. Alright, I've got the housing flipped back around. This is the hot side with the heat plate on it. I've got my turbine shaft with the suppressor ring and turbine metal seal installed. I'm just going to take a little bit of my favorite 10W30 motor oil in a cap and just kind of lubricate that shaft all the way around. It doesn't take much, and I usually stick my finger in the bearing too and get that kind of lubed up. Make sure you get both sides of it, and that's all it should take to get it lubed up. Now you want to pay special attention to this turbine seal ring here. You'll notice it has a stepped gap in it. You want to make sure that that gap, where is it? And let me find it here. There it is. You want to make sure that that step gap is pointing up with the turbo installed in the car. So I've got the drain down here at the bottom. That's about how it would sit in the car. Here's the feed line. Alright. You want that turbine gap seal to sit right here on top. Reason being is when you shut the car off and the oil is draining out of this thing coming out this bottom tube, if you have that seal gap pointed down, it'll have a tendency to run out of the turbo, get into your hot section, and next time you start it up there's a big blue cloud. So I like to make sure that this gap right here is pointing up to make sure there's no leaks. And you just want to gently insert this guy in here. Alright. Gap is up. Yep, there we go. Make sure my clamps aren't going to foul me out here. Alright. And a gentle press is all it should take to get this guy seated. Yep, there it went. So that plastic suppressor ring has kept that seal compressed against that shaft and allowed me to just kind of slide this thing in nice and easy. There are other ways to do it. I'm not going to cover them here because quite frankly they're dangerous. You can damage parts. Some of them involve taking the bearing out and kind of moving this thing around until it kind of gets past that lip, but then you run the danger of the seal expanding on the other side and then you're really screwed. So just buy that plastic suppressor ring from Clark's. You have a lot less trouble. And I've had people ask me in the past, you know, you leave that thing in there? Heck yeah. What's going to happen? Once this thing gets hot, that plastic's going to melt, disintegrate, turn into carbon, go straight out your exhaust. Alright, back to our cold side here. We just installed this turbine and it's nice and flush with the bearing surface here. Next step is to assemble the mating ring with a touch of oil. And this mating ring forms one half of the axial play mechanism of that shaft. It's going to keep it from moving in and outwards. Alright, so the play between your bearing and your shaft lands here has got to be nice and tight. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on when we get to measuring shaft end play and so forth. Alright, so slide your mating ring on there. Once you have your mating ring, go ahead and pick out a decent carbon seal here. Alright, there's a good carbon seal plate with the seal installed. At this point it's worth mentioning I rebuild all these carbon seals. I don't just, you know, reinstall them on turbos. All of these plates at this point are basically used unless you specifically tell me to order a new one, and they're pretty pricey. So I try to clean up these housings as best as I can. And on the reverse side here you'll see the actual carbon seal. This piece can get pressed out from the reverse side with a socket or something. You can just kind of generally tap it out of there nice and gentle like. And what you'll see on the reverse side is there's a little flat thin washer, and on the reverse side of it another O-ring, and that's usually what's leaking on these things. It's not that the carbon face itself is gone bad, but that O-ring in there gets really hard and brittle because they didn't used to use these nice new seals that come from Clark's, these new Viton O-rings. So that's what I install on each one of these. Go ahead and put one on now. This is the outer one that interfaces with the housing. Go ahead and get it installed, lube it up. Alright. Put a drop of oil on the carbon face. And this is now ready to go in. So you want to be real careful here not to push that turbine back out of the housing, because once that plastic suppressor ring slips off of there, it's in. And if you pull it back out, you'll have to reset yourself. So I like to apply a little bit of pressure with my fingers on the back here while I'm pushing this thing in. Sometimes it takes quite a bit of force. It may even take a little bit of hammer persuasion sometimes to get it in. Yeah, we're going to need a hammer on this one. So again, holding a little bit of pressure on the back. You want to just kind of tap around this thing until it starts to go in. There we go. Move over again. And there you have it. And that is a rebuilt carbon seal just pushed into that housing. Again, on the other side of that, you've got the mating ring, the bearing, and the shaft. Now, when it comes to installing this carbon seal retaining plate, I actually don't like to use the snap ring pliers. This thing has a lot of tension on it. If you get it cocked in, cockeyed, it can spring off and hurt you or break a window or whatever. So the way I like to do these is use a flat blade screwdriver. I'm just going to go ahead and get it started in one side here. Kind of work it into the groove to begin with. Get it in as far as I can by hand. Put your screwdriver in there. Hold some tension on that guy and just kind of push it in while working that screwdriver to compress that guy. Oop, almost got it. Just kind of walk it into the groove there. It seems a lot safer. You know, you're able to put a lot more control into it. There we go. Work that guy in there. There we go. So now it's most of the way into the groove, but to get it to the rest of the way, you got to use the screwdriver to just kind of pop it in there. There we go. I wish they come out that easy. So next step after that, go ahead and grab a shaft spacer. This is just a little piece of aluminum here. Alright, little shaft sleeve. I'll grab my calipers here so you can see what they measure. The stock one is going to be anywhere from 361 to 363 in length. Okay. So if you're in doubt about whether this thing has been sanded down or ground down or anything like that, 0.363 of an inch is about what they measure typically. We're going to go ahead and slide that on our shaft. Alright. Now that spacer should sit just proud of the carbon seal. The next thing you want to do, where are they? I'm going to just go ahead and dump all these out. My miscellaneous bag of hardware here. Oops, there's one. Here we go. Now after that shaft sleeve, there's going to be anywhere from 1 to sometimes even 3 of these little thin shims. And these come in several different sizes. This one is a 15 thousandths. Another 15. Another 15. I'm chock full of 15s at the moment. I don't usually use them too much. 10. So 10 and 15 thousandths is the one I've found so far. And these are used to set the distance of that compressor wheel to the housing. Okay, so this will come into play later on. Right now, I always just start with a 10 thousandths shim and err on the side of having too much play and sneak up on it rather than having too much. And when you put the compressor housing on, having it all bound up and maybe damage something. So I always start with the spacer sleeve and a 10 thousandths shim to get things going.
Sorry about the crappy picture, but this is all I got to work with. Okay. Here you can see the compressor wheel, the housing, and the bearing housing. Compressor housing is in red, bearing housing in blue, wheel in green. The way you do this is you set the compressor wheel on top of the shaft with only the sleeve in there, put the housing on it, bolt it in with a gasket of course, and take you an up and down measurement with your dial indicator, that's represented in pink here. Pull it in and out with some needle nose pliers, take your reading, subtract 15 thousandths, and that's how much space you need to make up with shims. So in this example, we got 50 thousandths for a reading. Subtract 15, we get 35 thou. To make that, all you need is a pair of 10 thou washers and a 15. Just like that, you're good to go. So hopefully that clears up all the mischief in the Rajay manual. It's a big mathematical equation. It's hard to understand. This makes it easy. So just follow the picture, follow the guide. It's easy. Alright, back to the video.
Next step is to install a compressor wheel. Some of these can be really tight. If they're old and used, sometimes they'll just slip right on without too much fuss. Just make sure none of the fins are damaged. Make sure there are no cracks in it. Again, be careful not to push that turbine seal back out. This one's a little stiff. Turn it a little bit as I install it here. Alright. And that's going to be most of the way there. It'll get snug the rest of the way down once you put the nut on it. And that is the next step. I don't like reusing the old ones with the nylon inserts. So when I build these, I just jump straight for the new Rajay nut. It's just a self-locking hex nut. It does require a washer on the other side of it. This is not a concave washer like the Corvair one uses. It's just a nice flat washer. Dig one out here. There we go. So you want to put that flat washer on there. Make sure there ain't a bunch of crud on it. And remember, these are reverse threads. Come on. Might be a little bit of pain in the butt to start here. The reason they're a bit of a pain is because they're smushed on one axis. And that's where they get their self-locking ability from. There we go. Now we're just going to take our 10mm socket and just start to run this thing down here. Now this unit I've already measured compressor to compressor wheel play and found a 10,000th shim to be about perfect for it. If I went too much farther than that and used a 15 or a combination of 10s, it just got too tight. So this one's being a bit of a pain wanting to cross thread on me. Maybe I'll try a different one. There we go, nice new one. Thankfully these nuts are made out of a lesser material than the shaft is. There we go. So you'll generally cross thread the nut before you cross thread the shaft. It should go on nice and smooth. It is a locking nut. It shouldn't require a whole lot of force to get it down there. If you do stop and look for issues like dirty threads, smushed threads, that type of thing, just kind of barely bottom that guy out there. There we go. So at this point, your rotating group is locked together. You can go ahead and remove your clamps. And because the rotating group is locked together, that is going to keep that heat shield and spring plate assembly together, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Just remember, if you have to break this back apart for any reason, put the clamps back on it. Otherwise, as soon as you loosen this thing, turbine seal will pop free and you'll have to start over from square one. So now the Rajay manuals say you're supposed to use a torque wrench for this. I just put German torque on it, never had a problem. Make sure you grab the turbine with a nice rag, otherwise you'll slice the hell out of your hand. Again, there's a holder for this. I don't have it. So we're just going to grab that thing nice and tight and apply some torque. That should do it. Alright. Now remember, with those clamps off, that heat shield is going to be pressing on the back of this turbine wheel. It shouldn't turn. This one turns a little bit. Generally that spring is going to be hard enough to lock these two together. You shouldn't turn them a whole lot anyhow because it puts stress on the bearing thrust circuits. So next is installing the compressor. Alright, to install the compressor cover, remember, make sure it's nice and clean. Make sure you've got as much of the carbon as possible off of it. If it's got some gouge marks and stuff in it from a failed bearing or a compressor flying apart, if they're not too bad, you can go at it with some sandpaper and just kind of clean it up. It won't make too much difference. If it's really banged up and boogered up, probably best to just get another one. This one looks pretty good, so we'll go ahead and use it. Always remember to use a nice fresh gasket. Make sure to use the correct thickness. And line up the flat part of the compressor housing with the flat part on the bearing housing. There are 2 pins to go ahead and locate this thing. Make sure they meet their maker here. There we go. And now you want to go ahead and snug down all these bolts right here. These ones you want to make sure you don't go too far. There's 6 of them. They're hex-headed bolts. If you go too far with the torque, they're just going into aluminum. You're going to strip it out, and then you're going to need a helicoil or a bigger bolt. So be careful with these.